Now more than ever, innovative technologies are fueling change and sparking new ways of thinking. Collaboration between corporations and startups is key to staying at the forefront of these trends. However, finding the right startups can be expensive, time-consuming, and ineffective. But Plug and Play is here to help. As a corporate partner, you will gain access to a whole ecosystem of innovation. Discover startups that meet your tech interests. Stay updated on the latest trends and network with industry peers. We will help you during every stage of your innovation journey, no matter where you are and where you want to go. Get in touch today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eugenio. I'm a principal with the ventures team here at Plug and Play. For those of you that don't know me, I oversee our Insurtech ventures team tasked with sourcing, betting, and investing in the latest and greatest startups across the world. I'm really excited to be here today, bringing you our Insurtech Selection Day Trends presentation. We're going to take a deep dive into a topic that has been getting more and more traction among our Insurtech partners. And then we're going to explore some of the trends we're seeing in that space. All right, let's kick things off. Today's topic of discussion will be climate change and insurance. It's the #1 area of interest among our P&C and reinsurance partners, and a fascinating topic given the latest developments and news. Not surprisingly, this year's #1 startup pick in our top 150 is also a climate-related startup. And if you're thinking, but hey, I work with life and health carriers, what does this have to do with me? Stick around until the end and you'll see that the trends are affecting both P&C and life and health verticals. And because this topic is so important, I'll be revealing what the #1 startup out of all the top 150 was. Okay, so during the past few months, we've seen an unprecedented chain of weather-related events. A deadly heat wave in the Pacific Northwest, and southern Europe that shocked veteran climate researchers, harsh droughts in the West, wildfires raging across Europe and Russia, cities and towns flooded in China and India. And unfortunately, this is no coincidence. All of these events are tied to climate change. 2 weeks ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, an official UN task force, released a demolishing 4,000-page report from 234 scientists that called the current climate change trends code red for humanity. The planet has warmed by about 1.2 Celsius or 2.16 Fahrenheit so far, and we're already seeing the consequences. The issue is global warming is happening so fast that scientists now say we'll cross a crucial temperature threshold as early as 2030. Up a decade sooner than they thought. And we're still on course for at least 3 degrees Celsius or 5 Fahrenheit of warming compared to pre-industrial era. So how do we get here? Well, in short, it's all our fault. If someone thought that we could blame fires or volcanoes for climate change, the IPCC put it to rest. It's unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, the ocean, and the land, science wrote. Given that there are only 25 minutes in this presentation, I will assume you all know how the cumulative emissions of greenhouse gases led by the US, the countries in Europe since the start of the industrial age, and more recently by China, have not only heated up the planet, but also placed it on a course to get much worse over the next 20 years. The IPCC report connects the dots between extreme events and long-term human causes. Sea levels are projected to rise depending on the increase, but basically between 1.5 feet to more than 3.5 feet by the end of the century. And a rise of 7 feet by the year 200 or 2100, I guess, or even 16 feet by 2150. That cannot be ruled out. And then you're all thinking, well, why is this relevant to insurance? Well, whether you're working on P&C or life and health, everything will be touched by climate change. Global losses from natural disasters in 2020 were $210 billion, according to our partner Munich Re, of which only 82 billion were insured. And both overall losses and insured losses were significantly higher than in 2019, which saw a total loss of $166 billion, of which only 57 were insured. The IPCC panel concluded that if the average global temperature continues to rise until 2050, nearly 1 billion people could face life-threatening heat waves at least once every 5 years. Imagine what the mortality tables will look like then if 1 in 7 people in the world could be affected by an event like this. But not all is lost. The most important finding from the IPCC report is that there are still several possible futures, and there are reasons to be cautiously optimistic. Solar energy plus battery storage is now far cheaper than energy generated from coal, gas, and nuclear energy, and has been since 2019, according to Forbes. Electric vehicles are gaining traction and could reach 60 to 70% of the market share by 2030, according to UBS. Now, remember, this was the core of our previous PNC presentation back in February. The EU recently announced carbon border adjustment mechanism, basically a carbon border tax. This is the first real financial mechanism that can be used to punish climate laggards. All right, let's go over the trends because there's a lot of things happening right now. And yes, some of it is pretty grim, but innovation and experimentation are certainly creating momentum. And with the UN Climate Change Conference, known as COP26, coming in November, people are becoming more and more engaged with this topic than ever. Let's go over 3 trends that will be shaping the space in the coming months and years. All right, the first trend is climate anxiety. So what is it? In a world that's still struggling with the backlash of the pandemic, isolation, and burnout, 2020 and to some extent 2021 have really taken a toll on people's mental health. Mental health is becoming a growing concern with climate change, not just among exhausted firefighters battling with PTSD or victims of natural catastrophes, but all across the board. People are experiencing what experts are calling climate anxiety, a sense of dread that includes anger, worry, and insecurity stemming from the unawareness of the warming planet. According to psychologists, anxiety is a rational response for the growing risk of climate change. But one of the main issues is people are not talking about it and have been dealing with this silently or privately for a number of years. Fortunately, the conversation is starting to burst through. With mounting evidence that climate change is threatening mental health, including a recent publication from Imperial College London's Institute of Global Health Innovation, companies, governments, and startups are starting to notice. And why is this important? Well, there are 2 specific reasons. First, prevention. Now that we know that there's a connection between climate change and mental health, we can do something about it. Fires, hurricanes, and heat waves can carry the risk of anxiety disorders or depression. Higher temperatures have been linked with depressive language and higher suicide rates. In fact, a study published by an International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health concluded that the connection is such that ultimately we could be able to predict weeks with high probabilities of suicide anomalies based on the weather, and therefore allow a more focused prevention effort during those weeks. And second, we can address the most vulnerable segment, the young. Anxiety, grief, and dread about a hotter planet are especially affecting young people. Gen Zs, particularly teenagers, are reporting feeling debilitated by climate anxiety and being frustrated by older generations. With a rate of suicide for ages 10 to 24 that has increased nearly 60% over the last 14 years, according to the CDC, allowing suicide to become the second leading cause of death among people ranging from 10 to 34, you can see why this should be a top concern. Okay, so who's addressing it? Fortunately, action is the antidote to anxiety. With mental health issues compounding, adding climate anxiety into the mix, people have turned to apps like Meru Health, Calm, and Talkspace, the latter which went public through a SPAC this year. All these startups and apps have reported a massive surge in users. In addition, millennials and Gen Zs looking to have a positive impact are flocking towards startups that are helping the circular economy to help minimize their carbon footprint and their guilt. As people look to break their isolation and share with their community and how they're experiencing climate anxiety, startups like IC Change An MIT Solve started building a platform where communities can collect and share their own personal climate stories, photos, and weather measurements are becoming more prevalent. And interestingly, through these user-generated insights and content, the platform is generating hyperlocal alternative data, enabling cities, engineers, and even insurers to improve risk modeling, infrastructure design, and become increasingly resilient. Because insurers love nothing more than new sources of data, this particular level of granular data, real-time data, is actually a great segue onto our second trend of the day. The second trend is extreme weather. You've all probably experienced it this summer. Extreme weather is quickly becoming the new normal, and with it, an increasing frequency and severity of these extreme weather events. The National Climate Assessment finds that the number of heat waves, heavy downpours, and major hurricanes has increased in the US and the strength of these events has actually increased too. California wildfires are not new, but the intensity and the number are. Thanks to the scorching weather and stronger winds, the Dixie Fire in California grew 110 square miles overnight and has been burning for over a month, consuming an area 3.5 times the size of Lake Tahoe. It is now the largest fire in the history of California and the largest one currently burning in the US. Sadly, this phenomenon is not exclusive to California. For the third straight year, Siberia, one of Russia's coldest regions, is being ravaged by wildfires. And for the first time in recorded history, smoke from wildfires in Russia reached the North Pole and stretched all the way to Mongolia. Even though the warming is right in line with the model predictions from decades ago, according to climate scientists, the impact from the warming is much larger than predicted, and worse, more frequent than expected. Okay, so why is this important? What was once predictable is becoming unpredictable. And at the same time, the potential consequences of those events are becoming A, harder to anticipate, and B, more widespread. This is bound to impact the insurability and affordability of insurance. Take, for instance, that due to the Dixie Fire and other wildfires, the air in Salt Lake City and Denver became some of the dirtiest in the world, worse than in Beijing or Delhi. According to climate scientists, these fires are becoming more prevalent, which can have serious implications on people's health and in certain specific zip codes in those states. So let's try to do some underwriting then. And in addition, more than 300 flights were delayed and 8 flights were canceled at Denver International Airport as heavy smoke and haze from these fires in California, Oregon, and Idaho obscured runways, making it difficult for planes to land. And that triggered a wave of travel insurance claims. Insurance relies on historic averages to model out outcomes and price risk. So if these events are more frequent, more severe, and have unforeseen consequences, it's all downhill from there. Insurance products will be mispriced. Insurers and their customers will argue over limitations of coverage. Insurance companies may be faced with unsustainable claims and even insolvency, and ultimately leaving customers with insufficient compensation. The key lies in allowing insurers to identify their tail risk. That is the risk of the severe catastrophe losses that could impair solvency. All right, so who's working on this? With climate change making the historical record of extreme weather an unreliable indicator of the current risk, more and more companies are interested in new sources of data and data crunching capabilities. And whoever has the best models gets to price risk properly or even avoid a catastrophic loss. This is why we're seeing an uptick in M&A activity in this space. Earlier this month, Moody's, a company best known for rating corporate and government debt, raised a few eyebrows with its acquisition of RMS, a climate and natural disaster risk modeling company that they bought for basically $2 billion from its UK parent Daily Mail and General Trust. Hazard Hub, an Insurtech startup providing API-driven property risk and insights to the P&C insurance industry, which actually went through this very same selection day not too long ago, and is an alumnus of our program, is getting acquired by our corporate partner Guidewire. The race to acquire more data and better predictive modeling capabilities leads us to believe that startups like Carpe Data and Zesty AI which are some of the most popular alumni from previous batches, are likely to become acquisition targets in the near future. So it's not surprising that the #1 startup out of this year's top 150 was Futureproof. Futureproof's predictive analytics enable carriers to understand the limits of existing risk models, which generally do not use AI methods, or capture the impact of climate change on P&C risks to better underwrite and price that risk. Excellent. So let's switch gears onto our third trend now, financial activism. So what is it? More people are seeing that the key to disrupt the flow of carbon into the atmosphere may lie on disrupting the flow of money towards coal, oil, and gas. That means targeting banks and asset management firms, and eventually insurance companies. Without them, the fossil fuel companies would almost literally run out of gas. How? Through project finance. Oil and gas projects are typically not bankable until they are insurable. If a company wants to build a coal-fired power plant or a tar sands pipeline, you need to get an insurance company to underwrite the project. Otherwise, no bank will finance it. But what about captives and maybe self-insurance? You can probably work your way around it. Sure, but don't forget it requires raising a substantial amount of capital to keep in reserves to pay for claims because the entity is now self-insured. And there's often a lower quality of service, no tax benefits, an ability to spread the risk, and additional overhead for management. Additionally, climate litigation is a growing concern among fossil fuel companies, and even just limiting the standard indemnity policies that cover companies' officers and directors, D&O, that would basically exclude coverage for those that don't take climate seriously and would put a huge amount of pressure on the board. So why is this interesting? Well, basically for 3 reasons. The first one, this is already happening. A few months ago, Exxon lost 3 board seats on its board of directors at its annual shareholders meeting to the hedge fund engine #1, which argued that the energy company needed to act faster to remake itself and invest in clean energy. Proxy fighting and financial activism are obviously not new, but what's interesting is that engine #1 owned 0.02% of the oil giant stock and managed to dominate the narrative. How? Engine #1 got the 3 largest US pension funds, CalSTRS, CalPERS, and the New York State Common, to support them in a very public and very expensive proxy fight, the kind that every CEO would like to avoid. And we believe it's only a matter of time before this type of activism, supported by large institutional investors, spreads to other financial services firms. The second reason why this is interesting is after banks and asset managers, insurers will come next. Banks are already feeling the pressure. A few years ago, a California-based environmental group called the Rainforest Action Network, or RAN, was trying to figure out how to slow down the deforestation of the Amazon. It found that Citigroup was leading a lot of those projects to cut down trees for pasture land. And so it ran a campaign that featured celebrities cutting up their city credit cards. Did they learn the lesson? Absolutely not. Same thing happened again with the controversial Dakota Access Pipeline, and celebrities started cutting up their credit cards again. Asset managers, like some of the insurance companies, are no less exposed to this situation. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, has had Australia-based Sunrise Project leading a campaign called BlackRock's Big Problem, aimed to pressure asset managers to rapidly align their business practice with a climate-safe world by changing their investment strategies. And it's actually working. In 2020, Larry Fink, BlackRock's CEO, promised to make sustainability its new standard for investing. The Big Four banks have started reducing their exposure to oil and gas, and Bank of America and Citigroup have withdrawn support from coal mining. And just like we've seen in fintech, innovation starts with the money and the asset managers or the banks, and then slowly but surely spreads towards insurance. The third reason is it has a huge impact on brands. We live in a world where it takes years to build a brand and just minutes to destroy it. And companies may be one bad PR event away from becoming the next delete Uber. With the power of social media enabling people to vote with their clicks and their dollars, the pressure is mounting on financial services companies. To take action, Some of the world's largest financial services companies recently joined several UN-sponsored initiatives, such as the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, which includes several of our partners like Nisei, Franklin Templeton, Shinhan, and Willis Towers Watson. This initiative, including the UN-convened Net Asset Zero Owner Alliance and the newly launched Net Zero Banking Alliance, are aimed to supporting the goal of net zero greenhouse emissions by 2050 or sooner, and to support investing aligned with net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner. But financial activists want more tangible results, like divestment. When Peabody Energy, the largest American coal company, filed for bankruptcy in 2016, it cited divestment as one of the pressures weighing on its business. And in 2019, Royal Dutch Shell called divestment a material adverse effect on its performance. So when BlackRock joined the Net Zero Asset Manager Initiative, the Sunrise Project stated that while it was an important milestone, these pledges are more valuable as marketing materials for ESG funds than they are to the people actually dealing with climate change. Yikes. Insurers are in a highly competitive market where billions of dollars are spent on direct marketing and acquisition channels, battling a constantly rising CAC for new customers. With an increasing number of customers already suffering from climate anxiety, the last thing you would like to wake up to is a PR campaign where your brand went from peace of mind provider to global warming coverage provider. And if that sounds bad, imagine the nightmare when the PR triggers a financial activist campaign at the board level. Okay, so who's working on this? Customers are increasingly focused on understanding the ESG impact of the companies that they deal with and the portfolios that these companies manage, using that information to keep, ditch, or switch providers. So it was a very smart move when just a few weeks ago, JP Morgan Chase scooped up Open Invest, the San Francisco-based startup founded by former Bridgewater employees who offered values-based financial solutions to help advisors build, manage, and report on ESG portfolios, even before Open Invest even raised a Series B. We've seen an increase in the engagement with startups like Minimum, a platform that allows businesses to understand their carbon impact and become carbon neutral by connecting them to market-leading carbon projects through their API. And as corporates make an effort to incorporate more ESG factors into their business, this is becoming more and more interesting. Now, it's not just corporates that are acquiring startups or startups launching new products. Even venture capital firms are becoming more proactive. Plug and Play started its sustainability vertical on October 2019 and has been rapidly growing globally to meet the urgency of our changing climate. We have launched programs with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste in Silicon Valley, Paris, Shanghai, Sao Paulo, Johannesburg, and Singapore. And other firms are catching up to us. IA Capital, a New York-based fund traditionally focused on Insurtech, recently closed its first fund focused on early-stage ESG investments in decarbonization and other clean energy solutions. And most recently, famed VC investor Chris Sacca announced he was coming out of retirement, along with an $800 million fund to help to basically help the planet. According to Morningstar, money flowing into sustainable investment funds hit a record of $2.24 trillion this year, second quarter, and that's a 12% increase over the previous one. All right, extreme weather and other climate impacts are now visible everywhere, all the time. Insurers are already feeling it. The cost-benefit analysis now clearly favors action. And if COVID taught us anything, is that not only does science matter, but also that we can make radical changes when we face terrifying, life-threatening new challenges, and climate change is exactly that. There is still time, but not a lot, so it's imperative that we act. That concludes today's Trends presentation. We hope you've enjoyed it, and as usual, this deck, along with the previous Trends decks, will be available to our anchor partners. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and feel free to reach out to our partner success team if you have any questions.